The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, then steady, then heavy, until the whole city seemed wrapped in a gray veil that blurred every shape and softened every sound. The evening lights shimmered through wet windows, and in the middle of that quiet storm, a message alert flashed on Sandra's phone. She stared at the screen for a long moment before picking it up, as if she already knew it would change something inside her, even if she did not yet understand what. The message was short, almost too simple. "I need to talk to you. It's important." It was from Keanu, and for reasons she could not explain, her chest tightened in a way she had not felt in years. She had just finished a long day and wanted nothing more than to rest, but something about his words, the timing, the storm, the weight behind the message, made her feel uneasy and restless. She whispered to herself that it was probably nothing, maybe some small piece of news, maybe something about a project. But the truth was she felt the pull of something deeper, something that had been quiet for too long. She sat on the couch and watched the rain roll down the window, each drop catching the light before sliding away. She thought back to the early days when she and Keanu first met, when everything was new and exciting. They had been younger, unsure of themselves, unsure of the world, but even back then there had been a spark between them, a gentle, unspoken connection that made every shared moment feel slightly brighter. They had grown with time, changed with experience, and walked different roads, always respectful, always kind, but always slightly distant in ways neither of them ever fully understood. Yet each time they crossed paths, something familiar rose inside them, something warm and comforting, something that made their conversations feel natural, as if no time had passed at all. She wondered why he needed to talk now after months of silence. Not silence born from anger or conflict, but silence born from life moving forward, from responsibilities pulling them in different directions, from unspoken emotions they avoided because they were both too humble, too careful, too gentle with each other's hearts. She sighed softly and typed a reply, "I'm here. What's going on?" But before she could press send, her phone rang. Hearing his name on the screen made her heart skip. She took a breath, picked up the call, and said quietly, "Hey." His voice on the other end was soft, almost fragile, as if he had rehearsed what he wanted to say many times but still had no idea how to begin. He said, "Sandra, I'm sorry to call so late. I need to see you, tonight if possible." There was something in his tone that troubled her, something that made her sit up straighter, something that felt like a wave about to crash. She asked him if he was all right, and he paused too long before answering. "I don't know." That was enough. She told him to come over. The minutes between the call and his arrival felt slow and heavy. She paced the room, fixing small things that did not need fixing, adjusting cushions, rearranging items on the coffee table, trying to control the rising mix of concern and anticipation inside her. She had always admired his humility and calm, his ability to remain grounded even when the world placed him on a pedestal. He had been through so much in his life, more than people knew, but he never complained, never let bitterness touch his heart. He carried his pain quietly and gave kindness freely. So hearing fear or uncertainty in his voice unsettled her deeply. When the knock finally came, she opened the door and saw him standing in the hallway, soaked from the rain, breathing slightly heavier than usual, eyes filled with something that resembled confusion, relief, and guilt. She stepped aside and let him in, grabbing a towel and handing it to him. He muttered a quiet thank you and dried his hair, his hands trembling in a way she had never seen before. She gently placed her hand on his arm and asked again, "Are you all right?" He looked at her, and for a moment it felt like the world paused, like the storm outside held its breath. He said, "I'm not sure how to say this, Sandra. I don't want to scare you. I don't want you to think I'm losing myself." She guided him to sit on the couch, her voice soft and warm, telling him to take his time, to breathe, to let the words come when they were ready. He sat there, staring at his hands, the same hands that carried so much strength, and yet trembled now with something he did not dare name. She sat beside him, close enough to show support, but not too close to overwhelm him. The silence between them grew heavy, filled with emotions neither of them fully understood. After a long moment, he whispered, "I've been feeling something strange lately, something pulling me back to things I thought I had let go. Memories, regrets, hopes I buried years ago, and I keep seeing your face in all of them." She froze, not because she was surprised that he cared, but because hearing it spoken aloud felt like opening a door they had both kept locked out of fear. He continued, "I tried to ignore it, but it kept getting stronger. I know this sounds confusing. I know I'm not making sense." She shook her head softly and said, "You're making sense, just keep talking." His eyes softened, but the hesitation remained. He said, "There's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time, but every time we met, I convinced myself it wasn't the right moment. I didn't want to complicate your life. I didn't want to lose what we already had." She felt a warmth rise in her chest, mixed with fear, mixed with hope, mixed with a sense of overwhelming tenderness. She had always felt something for him, something deeper than friendship, but she buried it too out of respect, humility, and kindness, because she never wanted to pressure him or confuse him. The room felt smaller, the rain louder, the air heavier. She leaned forward slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "Keanu, what is it you've been holding back?" He opened his mouth to answer, but his phone vibrated suddenly, interrupting the moment. He looked down at the screen and the color drained from his face. She asked gently, "Who is it?" He hesitated, then said, "Someone I hoped I would never hear from again." Her stomach tightened. His hands shook again as he silenced the phone without answering. She could see something old and painful in his expression, something that frightened her because she had never seen that kind of fear in his eyes. She asked carefully, "Is it something dangerous?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know, but if what I think is true, it could change everything." She wanted to press for more, but she saw his breathing quicken, saw the weight of whatever he carried pressing heavily on him. Instead, she placed her hand over his, grounding him, reminding him that he wasn't alone. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking comfort in her touch. When he opened them again, tears lined the edges, not from weakness, but from a life lived with too many burdens and too few people to share them with. He whispered, "I never wanted you to see me like this, Sandra. I always wanted to be the person who could make you feel safe, not someone who brought danger or confusion into your life." She shook her head softly and squeezed his hand, saying, "You don't have to be strong all the time, not with me." For a moment he looked at her with an expression so full of emotion that she felt her breath catch. He seemed like he was finally ready to say the thing he had been holding back all these years. His lips parted and Sandra felt her heart race, waiting for the words she had secretly longed to hear. But before he could speak, another knock sounded at the door. Sharp, urgent, demanding. Both of them froze. The rain outside intensified, beating against the windows like frantic hands. Sandra's pulse quickened as she stood slowly and looked toward the door. Keanu rose too, fear flickering in his eyes. She whispered, "Are you expecting someone?" He whispered back, "Number and Sandra, please don't open it." The knocking grew louder. 3 heavy strikes. Then silence. And in that silence, Sandra felt something shift in the air, something cold and unsettling, as if the storm had followed someone inside the building. Keanu took a step closer to her, his voice low and trembling. "I think it's connected to what I was about to tell you." She whispered, "Connected how?" He looked at her, eyes full of fear and regret, and said softly, "Because Sandra, before I came here tonight, I found something. Something with your name on it." Her breath stopped. The knock came again, louder, insistent. Keanu grabbed her hand, his voice barely audible. "Whoever is out there, they want you." And before she could process the terror rising inside her, the doorknob began to turn. The metal clicked. Slowly, deliberately, and Sandra felt her entire world shift. The doorknob turned so slowly that each tiny click echoed through the room like a warning neither of them were prepared for. Sandra felt her breath catch in her throat as she stared at the door, unable to move, unable to think, as if her mind had frozen in place. Keanu tightened his grip on her hand, the warmth of his skin trembling with fear he tried to hide, but could not. The rain outside battered the windows with loud, uneven beats, as if the storm itself was urging them to run, to hide, to prepare for something neither one of them understood yet. In the silence that stretched between each heartbeat, Sandra felt a strange mix of fear and disbelief, as if the moment was both real and unreal at the same time. But then suddenly the turning stopped. The door remained closed. The room held its breath. Keanu slowly stepped forward, placing himself between her and the door, his shoulders tense, his eyes fixed on the handle as if expecting it to jerk again at any moment. She could see the way his jaw clenched, the way his entire body shifted into a quiet readiness, as if he had spent his whole life preparing for moments he never talked about, moments he carried on his back like shadows that followed him everywhere. She whispered his name, but he lifted his hand slightly, signaling her to stay behind him, signaling her to trust him even though he had not yet explained what danger had followed him here. After several long seconds, he moved toward the peephole. Sandra wanted to pull him back, to tell him not to look, to avoid whatever waited on the other side of that door, but she could not find her voice. He leaned forward slowly, pressing his eye to the small glass opening, and for a moment, Sandra watched him hold his breath. Then she saw the confusion in his eyes, then shock, Then something darker, something like recognition. He stepped back abruptly. Sandra's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "Who is it?" she whispered. Keanu wiped a hand across his face, as if trying to clear away disbelief. "There's no one." She froze. "What do you mean, no one? We heard the knock." He shook his head in a way that frightened her more than the knock itself. His voice was low and uneasy. "I mean no one is there, not a shadow, not a shape, nothing." They stood in silence, the kind of silence that seeps under the skin and chills every bone. Sandra tried to make sense of what was happening, but her mind felt like it was spinning too fast. Keanu reached for the doorknob, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it. She grabbed his arm, whispering urgently, "Don't." He looked at her with gentle reassurance, though fear still flickered behind his eyes. "I need to make sure we're safe." She reluctantly loosened her grip and watched as he opened the door just a few inches. Cold air rushed in, bringing with it the sharp scent of rain and concrete. He opened it wider, stepping out into the hallway. The hallway was empty, completely still, dimly lit, the kind of emptiness that felt unnatural, as if the building had suddenly lost its soul. Sandra stood at the threshold, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Keanu looked both ways, searching for any sign of movement, any trace that someone had been there only moments before, but there was nothing. The door next to Sandra's apartment remained closed. The elevator at the end of the hall was still. The stairwell door was shut. Everything was normal, but nothing felt normal. As Keanu stepped back inside and closed the door behind him, Sandra felt a mixture of relief and dread. She asked softly, "Keanu, what's going on? What did you mean when you said you found something with my name on it?" He ran a hand through his still damp hair, pacing the room slowly, as if trying to gather his thoughts, as if trying to decide how much to reveal. She watched him closely, seeing the weight he carried, the burden he had walked in with, the fear he tried to hide behind a calm he no longer had control over. Finally, he stopped near the window, the rain casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across his face. He turned toward her and said, "I wasn't going to drag you into this. I came tonight to tell you the truth about how I feel and about something I've been hiding for years. But then, something happened earlier today, something that made everything change." She approached him slowly, her eyes soft, her voice gentle but steady. "Tell me." He hesitated, then nodded. "I went to my place this afternoon. I had been feeling strange for days, like someone was following me, watching me. I didn't tell anyone because I thought I was imagining it. I thought it was stress. But when I got home, I noticed my door wasn't fully closed." He swallowed hard. Someone had been inside. A wave of cold ran through her. "Were things taken?" He shook his head. "Not in the way you'd think. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. But things were moved, small things, personal things, and on my kitchen table." He looked down, his voice dropping. There was an envelope, no name on it, no return address, just an envelope. Sandra could feel her pulse quickening. What was inside? He lifted his eyes to meet hers, and the fear she saw there made her chest tighten. A photograph. She waited, afraid to ask the next question, but needing to know. A photograph of what? His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You." Her breath caught. "Me." He nodded slowly. "You, walking out of a studio parking lot 2 days ago, you were smiling at someone beside you. I don't know who took it. I don't know how they got it. But that wasn't the worst part." She shook but asked, "What else?" He hesitated again. There was handwriting on the back in red ink. He took a deep breath and said, "It said, she won't be safe when he tells her the truth." Sandra felt the room tilt slightly. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. She whispered, "The truth? What truth? Keanu, what could you possibly tell me that would make someone threaten me?" He looked away, guilt darkening his expression. "Something I should have told you years ago, something I thought I had buried for good. I didn't want it touching your life." He shook his head slowly. "I never thought it would reach you." Her emotions twisted into fear, anger, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. She moved closer, reaching out to touch his arm. "Keanu, whatever this is, you need to tell me. I can't help you if I don't know what we're facing." He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as if steadying himself before walking into a storm. "I will tell you, I promise, but before I came here tonight, I received another message. Not the one you saw, another one." He walked toward the coffee table and picked up his phone. He scrolled for a moment, then turned the screen toward her. There was a short message. No name, no number, just words. "If you tell her, everything ends tonight." Sandra felt a trembling fear spread through her. Who is doing this? Keanu shook his head helplessly. I don't know, but they know where I was today. They know where you were 2 days ago. They know I came here tonight. He ran a hand through his hair again, pacing with growing agitation. I thought coming here would keep you safe. I thought whatever this is, it was about me, not you. But now I realize I might have dragged you into something I can't control. She stepped in front of him, placing both hands on his chest, steadying him. You didn't drag me into anything. I care about you. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. She paused, her voice softer. I trust you. His eyes softened, and for a moment the tension in his body eased. He placed his hand over hers, holding it gently against his chest. I don't want to lose you, he said quietly. Not because of something I should have handled long ago. Before she could respond, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then the apartment went dark. A soft hum filled the silence, the sound of the building losing power, leaving only the dim glow of the storm outside to cast shifting shadows across the room. Sandra's heart raced. Keanu immediately moved closer to her, shielding her instinctively. From the hallway outside came a soft scraping sound. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, approaching their door. Sandra clung to Keanu's arm as the footsteps stopped just outside. The rain hammered the windows, thunder rumbled in the distance, and the room pulsed with darkness and fear. Keanu whispered, "Stay behind me." The footsteps stopped completely. Then a soft, low voice whispered through the door, barely audible but chilling enough to freeze the blood in their veins. He didn't tell you the truth, did he, Sandra? Her knees nearly buckled. Keanu pulled her closer, his entire body tense. The voice on the other side of the door exhaled a slow, eerie breath, then whispered, "Maybe I should tell her instead." And Sandra felt something inside her collapse in terror. The voice behind the door was so soft it almost blended with the rain, yet every word felt sharp enough to cut through the air and settle deep inside Sandra's chest. She stood frozen, her breath trapped in her throat, her mind struggling to understand how a stranger could know her name, how a stranger could know what Keanu had not yet said. The darkness in the apartment made everything feel closer, heavier, as if the shadows themselves had begun to listen. Keanu pulled her back gently, guiding her behind him, his body stiff with instinctive protectiveness. He whispered, "Don't move. Whoever that is, they're trying to scare us." But Sandra heard the tremor in his voice, the quiet fear he could not hide. The doorknob rattled once, a small, slow twist that sent chills racing through them both. Sandra grabbed the back of Keanu's shirt, grounding herself, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. She whispered, "What do they want?" And Keanu, still facing the door, replied softly, "They want to break me, and now maybe us." Then, without warning, the knocking started again. This time it was not the sharp, urgent pounding from before. It was slow, steady, deliberate, each knock spaced out perfectly like a signal or a countdown. Sandra could barely breathe. Keanu's jaw clenched, and he took a step closer to the door as if preparing for something he hoped wouldn't happen. He called out, his voice trembling but firm, "Leave her alone. Whatever you think you know, whatever you want, this is between you and me." Silence. Total silence. The kind of silence that makes you fear your own heartbeat. Then the voice whispered again, calmer than before, almost amused. "That's where you're wrong, Keanu." Keanu's breath hitched. Sandra could feel the tension radiating off him like heat from a fire. She wanted to ask what the stranger meant, but she also feared the answer. She watched as Keanu slowly backed away from the door, reaching for his phone in the dark. But before he could do anything, the footsteps outside began to fade. First softly, then more quickly, until they disappeared entirely, swallowed by the long hallway. They waited several seconds, listening, barely breathing. When nothing else happened, Keanu finally exhaled shakily and whispered, "We need light." He moved carefully to the small drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a flashlight. When he turned it on, the narrow beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing their frightened faces and the room around them. Sandra tried to steady her breathing, pressing a hand to her chest as if she could calm the storm inside her. The light flickered slightly, and she felt the overwhelming sense that something was watching them, even if no one was there anymore. Keanu walked to the door and pressed his ear against it. After several seconds, he slowly opened it just a crack and shined the flashlight into the hallway. Empty. The hallway stretched out on both sides, silent and still. He closed the door quickly and locked it. When he turned back to her, she saw the exhaustion and fear in his eyes, but she also saw something else, determination. He set the flashlight on the table and let the beam spill across the room. Then he sat down, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands covering his face. Sandra walked over slowly and sat next to him, placing her hand gently on his back. She rubbed slow circles between his shoulders, trying to ease the tension. He whispered, "I'm so sorry. I should never have come here. I should never have involved you." She shook her head firmly. "Don't say that. You came because you trust me, and I want to help you. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out." He lowered his hands and looked at her. His eyes were soft but burdened. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "I have to tell you the truth now. I should have done it from the beginning. I can't protect you if I don't." She nodded, bracing herself for whatever confession he had been carrying for so long. He took a slow breath, gathering the courage to speak. "Years ago, before I met you, before I knew the kind of peace you bring into rooms, I was involved in something I never wanted to touch. It wasn't crime, it wasn't anything illegal, but it was dangerous, and it involved people with too much power and too little mercy." He swallowed hard. "Someone close to me was hurt, someone I cared about deeply. I tried to help. I tried to do the right thing, but the people behind it, they didn't forgive. They didn't forget." Sandra listened intently, her heart pounding with empathy and fear. She gently took his hand, encouraging him to go on. He continued, "I walked away from that world. I disappeared from it. I cut all ties. For years I thought I was free." His voice cracked slightly. "But last month I started noticing things. Small things at first, someone watching my place, someone following my car, shadows that didn't feel like mine, and I told myself I was imagining it until today." She squeezed his hand tighter. "The envelope." He nodded. "The envelope and the message, and now the person who showed up at your door." He looked down, guilt heavy in his eyes. "I think they want to hurt me, and now they're using you to do it." Sandra felt a mix of fear and frustration building in her chest. She didn't understand why anyone would threaten her, why anyone would try to tear him down through her. She said, "Keanu, I don't care what happened in your past. You did what you thought was right. That doesn't mean you deserve this." He looked at her with a kind of sadness she couldn't bear. "I know, but they don't think like normal people. They don't stop, and if they think I told you anything." She cut him off gently. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance to hurt either of us." He blinked, surprised by her resolve. She felt fear, yes, but she also felt something stronger, her loyalty to him, her belief that he deserved peace, that he deserved someone who wouldn't run the moment things became difficult. She took his face gently between her hands and said softly, "You're not alone, not anymore." He leaned slightly into her touch, his eyes softening, a flicker of relief crossing his expression. He whispered, "I don't want you to be afraid." She smiled sadly. "I'm already afraid, but I'm more afraid of losing you." His breath hitched, and for a moment they sat in vulnerable silence, their connection deeper and more fragile than ever before. Then the flashlight flickered again. Just once. Then the lights in the apartment suddenly snapped back on. Sandra blinked at the brightness, her eyes adjusting. Keanu stood quickly, scanning the room as if expecting something or someone to appear. Everything looked exactly the same as before the power went out. Nothing had moved. Nothing was disturbed. But the air felt different, heavier, as if someone had been there while the lights were off and left without making a sound. Sandra wrapped her arms around herself, uneasy. Keanu walked to the door again, making sure the lock was secure. He pressed his head against the wood for a moment, breathing hard. She approached him and placed a soft hand on his back, grounding him once more. "Keanu," she whispered, "whoever they are, they're trying to mess with your mind. They want you scared. They want us scared. We can't let them win." He turned toward her slowly, his eyes meeting hers with a mixture of fear and admiration. "You're braver than you think." She shook her head softly. "No, I'm just not leaving you to fight alone." He gave her a faint, grateful smile, but before he could respond, a sudden vibration buzzed on the table. His phone. Sandra and Keanu stared at it, neither wanting to pick it up, knowing it could be another message, another threat. Keanu approached it slowly, his steps careful, as if he were walking toward something poisonous. He reached for the phone. When he turned it over, his face paled. Sandra whispered, "What does it say?" He handed her the phone with a trembling hand. The message read, "You should check outside your window, Sandra. I left something for you." Her heart pounded violently. Keanu moved quickly toward the window, pulling the curtain aside. Sandra followed close behind, though her legs shook beneath her. Outside, the rain still poured heavily, splashing against the pavement far below. And then she saw it. Right there, stuck to the outside of her third-floor window, held in place by the pounding rain, was a photograph. A picture of her, walking into her building earlier that night. And scrawled across the bottom in red ink were 5 chilling words. "You should have stayed alone." Sandra's breath choked in her throat. Keanu whispered her name, his voice breaking. And before either of them could react, lightning struck somewhere close, illuminating the room in a flash of white. When the light faded, they both realized something horrifying. The photograph wasn't the only thing on the window. There was a handprint beside it. A handprint on the outside, pressed against the glass. Fresh, human, and slowly sliding downward, the handprint on the glass slid down so slowly it felt like time itself had begun to melt. Sandra stared at it, unable to move, unable to blink, her heartbeat echoing in her ears like a trapped drum. The rain outside washed over the window, dripping past the photograph and the fading print, but the mark remained clear, as if whoever touched the glass had pressed with deliberate force. Keanu grabbed her shoulders gently but firmly, pulling her back from the window, his own breath unsteady. He whispered, "Someone was right there, right outside. Sandra, they were inches away from you." But she could barely process his words. Her mind spun, replaying every second since the knocking began. She felt exposed, violated, unsafe in a home she had always thought of as her safe place. She whispered, "How did they get up here?" Her apartment was on the 3rd floor with no balcony, nothing anyone could stand on. The window faced a narrow alley, slippery and dangerous even for someone on the ground. Keanu's eyes darkened as he scanned the window frame, his jaw tightening. "They didn't climb," he muttered. "They weren't hanging. Whoever it was, they reached the window from the inside of the building. They climbed out from another unit, maybe from the stairwell window. They planned this." The realization sent a cold wave through her. Someone had moved through her building like a ghost, silent and unseen, just to frighten them. Keanu stepped back and gently guided her to the couch. He knelt in front of her, holding her hands, calming her trembling fingers. "Sandra, listen to me," he said softly. "You are safe with me. I promise you that. I won't let anything happen to you, but we can't stay here, not tonight." She nodded slowly, though fear still twisted in her stomach. She trusted him more than she trusted her own thoughts at that moment. He stood and began checking the apartment, ensuring doors and windows were locked, scanning corners with the flashlight even though the power was back on. Sandra watched him move with controlled focus, his quiet strength giving her a fragile sense of grounding. She thought about all the years she had known him, all the kindnesses he had shown, all the moments he had brightened without meaning to. She had always seen him as calm, steady, gentle. But now she saw a side of him she had never seen before, protective, fierce, burdened by an old pain he had kept hidden from everyone. And somehow, despite the terror around them, her affection for him only deepened. When he finished checking the apartment, he returned to her side. "We need to leave," he said gently. "I don't know how long we have before they try something else. My car is parked in the garage. It's close." She stood, her legs shaking, and he immediately steadied her with a hand on her lower back. The touch wasn't romantic. It was grounding, steady, reassuring. She leaned into it, grateful for his presence. They gathered only essentials, her phone, her keys, a jacket, his wallet, and approached the door. Keanu opened it slowly, peering into the hallway. Everything was quiet again, eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt too deliberate. He motioned for Sandra to follow close behind him. She stepped into the hall, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner, her breath tight. They walked carefully toward the elevator. Keanu pushed the button, but the moment he did, something inside him hesitated. He looked uneasy. Sandra asked gently, "What's wrong?" He whispered. "If they cut the power earlier, they could tamper with the elevator. Stairwell might be safer." She nodded, trusting his instincts. They moved toward the stairwell door. Keanu pushed it open slowly, shining his flashlight into the dim space. The stairwell was quiet, the walls echoing the distant hum of the building's machinery. They started down the stairs, Keanu one step ahead, Sandra right behind him, both listening for the slightest sound. As they reached the second-floor landing, Sandra felt something shift in the air, something she couldn't name, a strange heaviness like being watched. She clutched the railing, her breath growing shallow. Keanu turned toward her, sensing her fear. "We're almost there," he whispered. But then, a sudden metallic clang echoed above them. They both froze. Keanu turned the flashlight upward, aiming it toward the third-floor landing. Sandra held her breath, waiting for a figure to appear, waiting for steps, waiting for anything. The light wavered slightly as Keanu's hand shook. Silence. But the silence felt wrong, too heavy, too calculated. Keanu whispered, "Keep moving," though his voice trembled. They descended the steps faster now, her heart pounding wildly, his hand occasionally reaching back to guide her without looking. When they reached the first floor landing, Sandra felt her legs beginning to shake from the fear and adrenaline. They pushed through the stairwell door into the garage. The smell of oil, concrete, and rain-filled air washed over them. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows across the parked cars. The sound of dripping water echoed through the space, amplifying every noise. Keanu guided her toward his car, parked near the far wall. They walked as quietly as possible, but Sandra felt exposed, like each step announced their presence to invisible eyes. Keanu unlocked the car with a soft click. He opened her door first, keeping himself between her and the darkness. She slid inside, her hands shaking. He closed the door gently, walked around to the driver's side, and entered quickly. The moment he shut the door, Sandra exhaled shakily, her heartbeat finally beginning to slow. He started the engine, the soft rumble filling the car with a fragile sense of safety. He turned to her and said softly, "We're okay, we're leaving. We'll figure out the rest later." But then, a faint tapping sound echoed from the back of the car. Tap, tap, tap. Keanu stiffened. Sandra froze, her breath catching mid-inhale. Tap, tap. Keanu reached slowly for the switch to turn on the rear lights. His hand shook as he pressed it, illuminating the back of the garage. The light revealed nothing. Only cars, shadows, empty spaces, rainwater dripping from pipes. "It's just the building," Keanu whispered, though his voice barely convinced himself. He shifted the car into reverse. But before he could move, the tapping came again. This time louder. Closer. From the trunk. Sandra's eyes widened in terror. "Keanu, someone is." He pressed his finger to his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. He turned off the engine, the silence slamming into them like a wave. The garage fell completely still again. He slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and whispered, "Stay here, lock the doors." She grabbed his hand urgently. "Keanu, don't, what if?" "I can't drive away if someone is back there," he whispered. "I need to know." She wanted to fight him on it, to convince him to leave, to run, to escape, but she saw the resolve in his eyes. It wasn't reckless bravery. It was responsibility. He wouldn't risk her safety, not even for a moment. He stepped out of the car quietly, closing the door with barely a sound. Sandra locked the doors immediately, her hands trembling. She watched him walk to the back of the car, every muscle in his body tense, every step slow and cautious. He reached the trunk, placed his hand on the handle, and paused. The tapping stopped. The entire garage went silent. Then, a whisper, so faint she thought she imagined it. But Keanu heard it too. "Open it, Keanu." He stiffened, his eyes widening. Sandra covered her mouth, trying not to scream. The voice came again, soft and cruel. "She needs to hear the truth." Keanu whispered into the stillness, "Leave her out of this." The voice chuckled, a low, chilling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Too late. Keanu stood frozen for several seconds, his hand still on the trunk handle, Sandra watching helplessly from inside the car, her breath trapped in her shaking chest. Finally, with slow, trembling fingers, he lifted the trunk. The lid rose, paused, then opened fully. Sandra stared, her heart hammering wildly. And inside the trunk was a single envelope. Plain, unmarked, resting perfectly in the center. Keanu reached for it with shaking hands, lifted it slowly and opened it. He pulled out a small piece of paper. He read it, and his face drained completely of color. Sandra pressed her hand against the window, whispering, "Keanu, what does it say?" He turned the paper around so she could see it. 5 words written in red ink. "You should have told her." Before she could process the message, a sudden movement flashed in the corner of the garage. A shadow, a figure, running, fast, toward the exit. Keanu dropped the paper and sprinted after it. "Keanu, wait!" Sandra screamed, fumbling with the door lock. But he was already gone, and the echo of his footsteps grew fainter and fainter as he disappeared into the darkness the moment Keanu vanished into the darkness of the garage. Sandra felt something inside her collapse, as if the last piece of safety she had been holding onto slipped from her grasp and shattered on the cold concrete floor. She pushed open the car door so fast that the metal swung wide and bounced lightly, but she didn't care. The fear that gripped her chest was too heavy, too sharp, too overwhelming to ignore. She stepped out into the dim garage, her heart pounding, her breath shallow, her mind spinning with panic and worry. She whispered his name, but her voice cracked, swallowed by the vast emptiness around her. The garage felt different now, colder, darker, more hostile, as if it had absorbed the fear they brought with them and was now breathing it back at her. Each step she took echoed loudly, bouncing off the walls, making her feel even more alone. She sensed something watching from the shadows, something that had been waiting, something that fed off her fear. She turned toward the direction Keanu had run, but the entrance to the stairwell was swallowed in deep darkness. She couldn't see a single trace of him. For a moment, Sandra felt frozen between two worlds, stay and be safe or run and risk everything to bring him back. But then the memory of his face when he saw the note in the trunk flashed before her eyes, the fear in his expression clearer than any words he could speak. That fear was not for himself. It was for her. And because of that, she couldn't stay in the car. She couldn't wait. She whispered to herself, I can't lose him, not now, not like this. She jogged across the garage, careful but desperate, her footsteps uneven as she fought both the fear inside her and the fear around her. She reached the entrance where Keanu had run, the heavy metal door still slightly ajar. She pushed it gently, and it groaned softly, revealing a long, dim hallway lit only by a single flickering bulb at the far end. The walls were lined with pipes and old utility boxes, and the faint smell of dust and dampness filled the air. She hesitated, gripping the edge of the door as she peered inside. Keanu, she called softly, her voice trembling. No answer. Only the distant hum of old machinery, and the soft, rhythmic dripping of water from somewhere unseen. She stepped inside. The hallway felt colder than the garage, as if she had crossed into a place untouched by warmth. She hugged herself as she walked deeper into the corridor, her eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The flickering bulb above her cast unstable patches of light and darkness across the walls, creating moving shapes that made her heart skip with each glance. As she neared the end of the hallway, she saw something on the ground, a small object. She bent down, her hands shaking, and picked it up. It was Keanu's keychain. Her breath hitched. He would never have dropped it unless something startled him, or unless something or someone forced him. She stood up quickly and continued forward, the fear inside her twisting into something sharper, stronger, urgency. She pushed through another door and found herself in a narrow maintenance tunnel. The sound of running footsteps echoed faintly, fading quickly, but she couldn't tell if they belonged to Keanu or someone else. She climbed down a short metal ladder that led to a lower platform, her hands gripping each cold wrung tightly. The metal creaked under her weight. Her heart thudded louder with each step she took. When she reached the bottom, the tunnel stretched in two directions, left and right, both vanishing into darkness. She felt tears build behind her eyes. Keanu, she whispered, where did you go? Then she froze. A faint sound drifted through the left tunnel. A voice, a strained, muffled voice. It sounded like him. Her heart leapt and she ran toward the sound, her footsteps echoing off the narrow walls. The tunnel seemed never-ending, twisting deeper beneath the building. She turned a corner and stopped abruptly when she saw a door at the end. Its edges glowed faintly with a warm, golden light leaking through the cracks. The contrast between the dark tunnel and the warm light felt surreal, almost unreal, as if she had stepped into a different world. She reached for the handle and pulled the door open slowly. The moment she stepped inside, she felt warmth brush against her skin. It was a small boiler room, the kind people rarely entered unless something needed repair. Old pipes ran along the walls, and a furnace hummed softly, casting waves of heat into the cramped space. And there, on the floor near the back, was Keanu. Sandra gasped and ran to him, dropping to her knees beside his slumped figure. He wasn't unconscious, but he wasn't fully alert either. He blinked up at her slowly, confusion clouding his eyes. She placed her hands gently on his face, her voice shaking. Keanu, what happened? Are you hurt? He pressed his hand over hers weakly and whispered, I'm okay. I followed someone. They were fast. They knew this place. Then I think something was in the air. I felt dizzy for a moment, but I'm all right. He tried to sit up, and she helped him, wrapping her arm around his back. She looked around nervously. We have to get out of here. Whoever did this could still be close. Keanu nodded slowly, still catching his breath. We will, but Sandra, I saw something before I ended up here. He looked at her with eyes full of dread. The person who ran, they knew me, they weren't a stranger. She felt a cold twist in her chest. What do you mean? I recognized their voice, he whispered. From years ago, from when everything started. Sandra looked around the boiler room fearfully. Keanu, we need to go now. He nodded and shifted his weight, preparing to stand. But just as he tried to rise, a loud metallic clang echoed through the tunnels outside the room. The sound was sharp, sudden, and close, too close. Sandra's entire body tensed. Keanu's eyes widened. He whispered, they're here. She stood and pulled him to his feet, helping him steady himself. They moved quickly toward the door, but before they reached it, it slammed shut in front of them with a violent force. Sandra screamed and stumbled back. Keanu grabbed her, held her tight for a moment, then released her and tried pulling on the door. It didn't budge, not even slightly. From the other side came a slow, mocking knock. 1, 2, 3. Sandra felt tears rise again, this time from pure terror. Keanu pressed his fists against the door. Let us out, leave her alone. The voice they heard next was low, distorted by the metal but unmistakably human. Keanu, you never learn, do you? Sandra's breath shook. Keanu closed his eyes, pain sweeping across his expression. The voice continued, colder this time. You should have told her the truth long ago. You kept her blind, vulnerable. Sandra's lips trembled as she whispered, Keanu, what truth? What are they talking about? Keanu turned to her, his face pale, his eyes filled with regret and fear. He opened his mouth to speak. But before he could say a single word, a thick, dark smoke began seeping in through the vents at the top of the boiler room. It drifted downward in slow waves. Heavy, unnatural, suffocating. Sandra coughed, her throat burning. Keanu grabbed her hand, pulling her back, trying to find a spot where the smoke thinned. The voice outside spoke again, almost gently, as if enjoying every second. It's time she heard everything, Keanu. The smoke thickened. Sandra's legs began to weaken. Keanu held her tight, supporting her weight as she fought to stay conscious. Her heart pounded painfully. His voice trembled as he whispered in her ear, Sandra, I'm sorry. I should have told you from the beginning. She dug her fingers into his arm, her voice barely a whisper as her vision blurred. Told me what? And then the smoke swallowed them both. The smoke pressed into Sandra's lungs like a heavy hand, forcing out every breath she tried to take. The room spun slowly at first, then violently, twisting the walls into unsteady shapes. She clung to Keanu's shirt, her fingers shaking as she fought to remain conscious. The smoke was thick and dark, almost oily, pouring out of the vents in suffocating waves. Keanu pulled her close, trying to shield her face with his sleeve, his own coughing growing harsher with each passing second. He whispered her name over and over again, voice cracking with panic, as if the repetition alone might anchor her to reality. Her vision blurred at the edges. His face faded in and out of focus, the warmth of his hand trembling against her cheek. She whispered weakly, Keanu, please don't let go. He shook his head fiercely, even as his own strength began to falter. I'm here, he rasped. I'm not leaving you. I won't let them take you. But the smoke kept descending, coiling itself around them like a living thing determined to crush every last breath they had left. Just as Sandra felt her legs give out, a loud metallic clang echoed from the vent above, then another, and another. The noise grew until the entire boiler room vibrated. Keanu forced his head upward, squinting through the thick haze. Something was banging from behind the metal wall. The noise grew louder, sharper, until the vent burst open. A rush of clean air spilled into the room. Sandra gasped involuntarily, filling her lungs with a weak breath of relief. Keanu pulled her backward, away from the falling metal, shielding her as debris crashed onto the floor. And through the opening in the wall, a figure dropped down. But instead of danger, instead of the shadow they feared, the figure scrambled to their side, immediately pulling out a small device and holding it toward the vent above. Within seconds, the smoke began to thin, sucked upward by the device's low hum. Sandra blinked hard, tears streaming from her burning eyes. Keanu's voice broke as he whispered, Who are you? The figure turned. A woman. Dressed in dark clothes, her face partially hidden by a scarf, her eyes sharp and determined. She spoke in a quiet but steady voice. "You need to move now, you don't have long." Keanu coughed hard, steadying Sandra in his arms. "Why are you helping us?" The woman hesitated, then said something neither of them expected. "Because this isn't about you anymore, it's about her." Sandra felt her stomach drop. "Me," she whispered, her voice still shaking. The woman nodded. "They targeted him to get to you, but not because of anything he did wrong, because of something he protected." Keanu's expression tightened. "Stop, don't tell her that, not like this." The woman looked at him with a kind of sadness. "You should have told her long before now." Sandra, still coughing, held onto Keanu's sleeve. "Please, someone tell me what is going on." Keanu closed his eyes as if the weight of years pressed down on him at once. He took her hands gently, guiding her to sit against the wall where the air was clearer. He knelt beside her, his voice soft but filled with pain. "I didn't get involved with dangerous people because I was trying to fix something in my own life," he whispered. "It was because I was trying to protect someone else, someone important, someone innocent, someone who trusted me." He swallowed hard. "And that someone was connected to you." Sandra's heart pounded painfully. "Connected how?" Keanu lowered his head. "Years ago, I got a message from someone who claimed they knew something about you, something personal, something they said they could use to ruin your life. I didn't know who they were, I didn't know their motive, but I knew I couldn't let anyone hurt you, so I met with them, and I made a deal." Sandra stared at him, her eyes widening. "A deal?" Keanu nodded, shame flickering across his face. "I told them to leave you alone, to forget your name, to erase whatever they thought they had. In exchange, I agreed to stay quiet about something I witnessed, something illegal, something they didn't want getting out." He looked at the floor. "I thought I could handle it. I thought it would end there." Sandra felt her chest tighten, not from fear anymore, but from heartbreak. "You did that for me?" she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I didn't want you to see me as someone who brings trouble. I just wanted to protect you." The woman who rescued them spoke quietly from the doorway. "He kept his part of the deal, but they didn't keep theirs." Keanu looked up sharply. "Why are they targeting her now? I kept quiet. I did everything they asked." The woman's eyes softened with pity. "Because it stopped being about silence. It's about leverage now. They realized you care about her deeply, too deeply to hide it, and they are using that against you." Sandra's breath shook. "So this is my fault." Keanu grabbed her hands. "No, it's mine. I should have told you. I should have asked for help. I tried to handle everything alone because I was afraid of losing you." Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. "And now?" He squeezed her hands tightly. "I'm still afraid of losing you." Before she could respond, the woman motioned urgently. "We need to move. They know you're still alive. They know you made it out of the smoke." She led them out through the vent and into another narrow maintenance shaft. Keanu supported Sandra as they climbed upward. The woman guided them silently, moving quickly through the tunnels, knowing the layout with an ease that suggested she had been through them many times before. When they finally emerged into an abandoned storage room on the first floor, Sandra felt weak but steadier. She leaned against Keanu, drawing strength from his presence. The woman closed the hatch behind them and pulled down a rusted metal shelf to block it. Sandra looked at her, confusion mixing with gratitude. "Why are you helping us? Who are you?" The woman took off her scarf. Her face, though serious, was gentle, kind, familiar in a way Sandra couldn't place. "My name is Lena," she said softly. "I used to work with the ones who came after you, but I left. I couldn't be part of what they did. I couldn't hurt people who didn't deserve it." Her voice cracked slightly. "Keanu helped someone I loved years ago. He saved them. I owe him my life. I owe you both." Keanu blinked in shock. "Lena." She nodded. "I thought you were dead," he whispered. "I had to be," she said quietly, "to survive." Before they could say more, the building's alarm system blared to life. Loud, shrill, echoing through every floor. Red emergency lights flashed, painting the room in unsettling bursts of color. Lena's expression hardened. "They're locking the building down. They know you escaped the boiler room." Sandra's pulse quickened again. "What do we do?" Lena moved to a side door and cracked it open just enough to peek into the hallway. "We leave now, through the loading dock. I parked a car there. They won't expect us to exit that way." She turned back to them. Keanu, stay close to her. Do not let go of her hand. He didn't need to be told. They moved through the hallway quickly, avoiding the main corridor where heavy footsteps clattered in the distance. Lena led them down a set of stairs that smelled of dust and old cleaning chemicals. They emerged into a dark loading area where crates were stacked against the walls and a single metal door led to the alley. The night air outside was colder but fresh, the rain finally reduced to a mist. Lena pointed to a dark car parked beside a dumpster. Get in, I'll drive. Keanu helped Sandra into the back seat, then climbed in beside her, still shaken but determined. Lena started the engine and pulled out into the alley, driving fast but steady through the narrow back roads. For several minutes, no one spoke. Sandra held Keanu's hand tightly, her thumb brushing gently over his skin. He squeezed back, grounding himself in her presence. She leaned her head on his shoulder, exhaustion and fear mixing with something softer, something she had felt for him long before tonight, something she had pushed down because she thought it could never be returned. He turned his head slightly, resting his cheek against her hair. He whispered almost too softly to hear, I'm sorry. She whispered back, I'm not angry, I'm just scared. Me too, he admitted. But I'm glad I'm with you, she added softly. His breath hitched, I'm glad you're with me too. Lena spoke from the front seat. We're almost there, I know a safe place. The car sped through the quiet streets until they reached an old warehouse by the harbor. Lena parked behind it, out of sight. She helped them inside through a hidden side door, leading them into a small room lit by a single lantern. Sandra sat down on a crate, her body finally giving in to exhaustion. Keanu sat beside her, his hands still holding hers, their fingers tangled gently. Lena stood nearby, watching the door, staying alert. After several minutes, the silence settled into something heavy but calmer. Sandra turned to Keanu. So, is it over? He shook his head softly. Not yet, but we're alive, we're together, and that means we have a chance. She brushed her fingers along his cheek, wiping away soot. Keanu, will it ever stop? Will they ever leave us alone? He leaned his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling softly. I don't know, but I know one thing. She whispered, what? He looked into her eyes with a depth that made her heart ache. I love you, he said softly. I've loved you for so many years. I stayed quiet because I didn't think I deserved you. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to bring darkness into your life. But tonight, I realized you deserved the truth, and so did I. Her breath trembled. Tears gathered in her eyes, but they were soft tears, full of emotion, not fear. Keanu, she whispered, her voice breaking gently, I love you too. He closed his eyes as if her words were the only light left in the world. He leaned forward and kissed her forehead, a gentle, trembling kiss full of years of held-back emotion, of quiet longing, of resilience and tenderness, and the hope for a future without fear. She rested her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close, warming her with the quiet strength he had always carried. Lena watched them with a faint, sad smile. You two will get through this, she said softly. I'll help you disappear for a while. I know people who can keep you hidden. Keanu nodded, thank you. Sandra looked up at him, her voice steady for the first time in hours. Whatever happens next, we face it together. And for the first time since the night began, he smiled, small, tired, but real. The storm outside began to fade. The distant thunder softened. The mist lifted from the streets. And in the quiet safety of that small room by the harbor, two people who had spent years holding back finally allowed themselves the truth. They were not alone. They were no longer afraid of saying what had lived in their hearts for so long. The danger was not yet gone. The road ahead would be difficult. But through fear, through darkness, through everything they had endured, they found each other. And that changed everything,